Hi, today we're going to be talking about the organization of the research paper, and first we're going to be looking at eight questions that we adapted from an article about writing research papers. The questions don't always have to be answered, but most of the time there's no particular order the questions have to be answered in. And we're going to look at an article that I published on reporting verbs and try to look at some of the ways that I tried to answer these questions in my own writing. So the first question, what are the key sources? And what I think key sources are, in this case, are the sources upon which I built my argument. That is, that this is going to be an important topic. They're not necessarily directly related to the topic, although some are, but they're ways on which I built. These are the sources on which I built my talking about, in this case, reporting verbs. And I put these all from the first paragraph of the literature review. The first one is Sekita, 2002. And he was very important for me because he was one of the few books that I found that talked completely about reporting verbs. Hyland and Milton, 1999, was important because it talks a lot about that reporting verbs are something you use persuasively and to express your personal relationship, and that was one of the key parts. And the difficulty and the rhetorical level, I cited three sources: Charles, 2003, Hyland, 1998, and Silver, 2003. And again, so these are the basic ideas of the paper about reporting verbs, and I established those by citing these sources at the beginning of the paper. The second question, or what are the major issues and debates about the topic? And that question I used to create an outline for the entire literature review. So I broke down the literature review into three major issues: the role of reporting verbs in academic discourse, the pedagogical problem of reporting claims, and creating materials for teaching about reporting verbs and rhetoric. And then I broke down that topic into two topics, what I call the design of the corpora and the reporting verb sample. And so in the class, we'll give you an outline for your literature review in the research paper, in which you'll fill in what you think are the major issues that you want to discuss. The third question is, what are the origins and definitions of the topic? And this gives you a historical perspective if the topic is a particularly old one. Sometimes it's not the case here, where I have a particular article by which the topic begins, in a sense. There was no one article, so there was not one particular article I needed to cite. And also, are there any definitions? And again, you have to, this is where you make a judgment about your audience and make sure that everybody is on the same page as far as what are the key issues in your topic. So I start for the last 400 years, and that just gives you a general perspective. And again, my point was that some of the issues that I'm going to be discussing here are not new issues, but have been going on, have been discussed for a long time, and that gives somewhat more substance to my argument. The next question is, what are the epistemological and ontological grounds for the discipline? And again, what I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to establish that what is the basic assumption underlying this entire research, which is that we use textual borrowing, or we use other texts as a way of developing our own argument. And so that it's not so much just a natural trend, but that the writers will particularly choose what articles and how they report them in order to develop their own argument. Next is the key theories, concepts, and ideas. So one of the key theories, of course, of this research is that what a writer does is build up a network that connects the writer and previously published writers, and that they use citations or texts in order to establish that network. And that one of the reasons why writers cite text is what you call ethos. That is, that you're a good person and that you're familiar with all of the important text, and that you're sharing your ideas, and that your ideas are carefully built upon other ideas. And so that makes you seem as a writer to be a much more competent and honest person. Okay? And then I use another citation here from Ivanish about persona, that is yourself in your argument. So, and again, we've been talking all semester about evaluating arguments and expressing your own ideas in your argument. So it's not simply a question of reciting what literature, but also that your own sense in every citation expresses your own opinions. And that's why you have to be very careful with choosing reporting verbs. The next question, what are the political standpoints? I mean, this is not a particularly political topic, but there are certain assumptions that I need to address. One is that non-native English speakers don't always have the linguistic resources for expressing their own arguments, and that you can't simply rely on a dictionary. That's a kind of political issue, in the sense that I'm arguing why we need to teach students this very explicitly, that traditional textbook approaches aren't very good, and so that we need a new way of teaching. So that's a sense of political, that the old ways of teaching do not necessarily reach the goals that we want for textual borrowing, and so that we need a new approach. So what are the main questions and problems that have been addressed to date? Well, one of the questions is, how can concordancy, which is the technique that I use to study reporting verbs, how can that be a useful technology for pedagogy? So the problem is to find a technology or a pedagogical approach that will best solve the problem of teaching students about reporting verbs. And you can see here, I make a claim about concordancy, and then I cite Biber, Conrad, and Repin to explain and to support my claim. And here's a good example of using a citation to support your own claim. I make a claim and then use them to support it. And then I continue to develop what they said by creating materials that can help students make the kind of choices of a reporting verb by accessing a sample of sentences we hope that they could. And again, I cite Granville and Dixon because they use the term metacognitive understanding, and that explicitly states the goal that I have for this research. The final question, how is knowledge on the topic structured and organized? I didn't explicitly discuss the organization of the knowledge. It's in an earlier question about what issues that I'm addressing. In some forms, in some genres of disciplines, you may need a much more explicit statement at the end of your literature review as to how you're going to organize this data and your literature review. I didn't do that. You can look at it, but I didn't explicitly answer this question. So again, these are the kinds of issues that you need to address. Obviously you don't have to address every one of them explicitly. Some of them may be implicit, but you have to have a sense that the reader can easily follow your argument. That's the biggest problem with the literature review, is making it clear to the reader how you're developing your argument, so that at the end of the literature review, it's absolutely clear what research you're doing. There are no surprises in an academic paper. Everything has to come back to those research questions that you're trying to develop, and why are you developing those particular questions. That has to be answered in the literature review. That's the most important part.